Hi, my name is Jonah Brody, and I'm a European defense researcher here at Finabel. And I recently wrote a report titled Lessons of Operation Barkhane for Future European Engagement in the Sahel. And I'm here to talk a little bit more about the research that I carried out and how the European allies can jump back in to the Sahel if they feel the time is right.
What is Operation Barkhane?
So the French military presence began in Mali in 2013 at the request of the Malian authorities to stop an advancing terrorist threat that was closing on the nation's capital, Bamako. The intervention succeeded in its intended goal of preventing the collapse of the government and pushing away jihadist groups. However, French officials were really quick to recognize the weakening security situation in the larger Sahel region, which roughly comprises 5 states, Mauritania, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, and Chad. And the French Ministry of Defense committed troops to stay in the region to fight the terrorist groups on a long-term basis. And reorganizing the French forces to operate in Mali and beyond, the ministry fused Operation Serval, the ongoing operation, with Operation Epervier, which was going on in nearby Chad on August 1st, 2014, which ended up taking the name Operation Barkhane. And the aim of Barkhane was simply twofold. It was to prevent the establishment of a terrorist safe haven in the Sahel, and to help the G5 Sahel states build up their armed forces to be able to mitigate this threat on their own.
Why is France committed to fighting against Islamist terrorism so adamantly in the Sahel?
So France continued its engagement in the Sahel with Operation Barkhane over the course of 9 years for a few different reasons. First and foremost, the Sahel is in Europe's backyard, and France was really worried about terrorist groups being able to capitalize on the weak security situation in the region and use it to plan out and carry out attacks on French soil. This was especially the case after the attacks in France throughout 2015. Second, France wanted to limit migration flows coming from Africa, and the region's instability only exacerbated the European refugee crisis. Third, France had economic interests in the region that they wanted to protect, such as the extraction of natural resources. And a final key reason that the French government listed was to protect French nationals working and living in the region who were under the threat of kidnapping by various terrorist networks.
Who else is involved in Operation Barkhane?
So France used Operation Barkhane as a way to help other operations that were also occurring in the region by its allies. And they did so by helping with logistical and intelligence capabilities. And the missions they aided were first the UN peacekeeping mission in Mali, the EU training mission in Mali, also known as the EUTM, and Task Force Takuba. 22 EU nations worked within the EUTM to train the Malian military to help take over the security mission that it was carrying out. But this operation came to an end in April 2022. Task Force Takuba was a recent creation founded in 2020 as a way to augment the training capabilities. Under the EUTM, European soldiers were not allowed to join Malian troops in the field. European allies felt that this was a weakness of the operation, so Task Force Takuba was incorporated into Operation Barkhane as a way for European allies to join the Malian forces in the field.
Why has the security situation worsened?
So despite a relatively large military presence in the region, the security situation in the Sahel has continued to weaken over time. Part of this has to do with the means the French military utilized in carrying out its mission. France really relied on a counter-terrorism approach to improve regional security, and that was focused mostly on stamping out local franchises of Al-Qaeda or ISIL. However, the jihadist threat is only one of the challenges in the Sahel that threatens government control of the land. There are rural anti-state insurgencies that are popping up all over the region, and leaders have mobilized due to a wide range of ethnic, geographical, ideological, and political motivations. Jihadists have capitalized on these local conflicts to build alliances with different communities to increase their influence. So focusing on the jihadist threat has allowed these conflicts to continue, and as government control has weakened in recent years, violence has only increased.
What is the difference between counterterrorism and counterinsurgencies?
So there are two approaches that states and militaries can take to address security challenges. And the first is a counterterrorism policy, which is what France utilized in its operation in the Sahel. And counterterrorism operations are a set of measures aimed at preventing and responding to acts of terrorism, which are characterized by the use of violence against civilians or civilian infrastructure in order to achieve political or ideological goals. Counterterrorism operations may utilize intelligence gathering, the interdiction of terrorist plots, and targeted strikes or decapitation strikes against high-value targets and other measures designed to disrupt terrorist activities. This is different than a counterinsurgency approach, which is much more broad. These seek to address the root causes of armed conflict, typically in situations where armed groups are seeking to overthrow a government or control a territory. Counterinsurgency operations typically involve a combination of military, political, and economic measures aimed at undermining the insurgent support base, building up the legitimacy of the government, and restoring security and stability to the affected area.
Why did President Macron end the operation?
In June 2021, French President Emmanuel Macron announced that he was ending Operation Barkhane, and operations officially came to an end on November 9th, 2022. He cited several reasons for the end, and one of the primary reasons had to do with the growing hostility of the local populations towards the French presence in the Sahel. There has been a rise of anti-French riots, and it's been increasingly difficult for the French to carry out the necessary operations that they have envisioned. Another factor was the lack of progress in achieving the operation's objectives. Despite years of ongoing military operations and billions of euros in investment, Islamist extremists have continued to gain ground in the Sahel, with attacks on civilians and security forces increasing in frequency and severity. Finally, Macron emphasized the need for a new approach to focus more on development, government, and diplomacy. He announced plans to reduce the number of French troops in the region and to shift the focus of French engagement towards supporting governments and populations in the Sahel countries in their efforts to address the root causes of the conflicts. Macron has not announced for the moment any new movements moving forward or new policies moving forward, so it remains to be seen what the French will do in the future.
What lessons can be learned from Operation Barkhane?
French and European policymakers have hinted that they plan on jumping back into the Sahel in the future in order to secure the region's stability and security. In order to properly do so, there are three important lessons that policymakers must consider before getting back into the region. First and foremost, policymakers have to understand the situation on the ground in order to create a comprehensive plan. French policymakers seemingly underestimated the complexities in the Sahel region by the time Serval became Barkhane. The counterterrorism approach in terms of stamping out Al-Qaeda or ISIL affiliates wasn't comprehensive enough to deal with the local rivalries and insurgencies that were playing out. France needs to start at the local level, or Europe in general needs to start at the local level in order to build up these communities from the ground up and increase security so that jihadists cannot take advantage of ongoing conflicts in the region. Second, if policymakers want to internationalize the Sahel operation, they must encourage dialogue between allies. France, as the leader of operations in the Sahel, wanted to include its European and local partners to have a, quote, stronger, more inclusive response to the security crisis. Unfortunately, cooperation was not always a priority. France's G5 Sahel allies often felt that they were ignored in policy planning and implementation, and they expressed their frustration in how French policy often seemed neo-colonial in its implementation. Paris and Berlin maintained competing visions on how to carry out the operation's approach, with Berlin with Berlin often taking a back seat to what Paris was dictating. New regional engagement can't have this infighting. Allies have to cooperate with each other in order to make this a really comprehensive approach. Another benefit of an inclusive coalition is that it acts as a force multiplier in a sense of legitimacy, something that's very important for operations outside of the European Union. Third, policymakers must decide if they're willing or able to bear the cost of new engagement in the region. Barkhane was an expensive operation to conduct. Some estimates place the cost in terms of finances to be 1 billion euros, and it cost the lives as well of 59 French soldiers. Analysts have argued that new engagement in the Sahel must come in the form of a counterinsurgency operation, which costs much more in terms of finances and capital that needs to be spent in order to have an effective military operation. At a time in when European states are supplying costly aid packages and armed supports to Ukraine, Europe must reflect long and hard to determine if they are able or are willing to finance a future mission before deciding it's time to re-engage. New engagement must be thought comprehensively and together, and paying lip service to the G5 states helps no one.